I'm going to lay out the puzzle pieces to show you this new economic theory that I've never seen identified in philosophy or economics. I'm an economics major, by the way, but very studied in philosophy. So I've never seen this theory, this theory, but you'll see how it's an unbroken line of logic as we go through this today. All right, so let me first make clear, though, when I talk about everything will be free, I'm not talking about, as you know, socialism or communism. But I need to make that clear because after a couple of weeks or a few weeks, we post this on my YouTube channel. And I don't want newbies coming to see this to think that I'm promoting any form of socialism or communism, because that's what they always tell you. You're going to get things for free and equal share and all that BS, right? No, this is a world of pure capitalism. But no one's seen it before. And the reason they haven't seen it is because on planet Earth, we have never experienced pure capitalism. So in the future, with pure capitalism, instead of money being business owners' payoff or rewards, the payoff and reward becomes contribution, pride, happiness, from tangible money to intangible emotion. But I'll have to go through the puzzle pieces for you to see the big picture, which is what I'm going to do now. Indeed, to get to see that Neothink super puzzle, to see its puzzle picture revealing the world of mankind's full and seemingly selfless potential, I have to snap together the pieces here today. So I'll start here. The computer and information revolution of the late 20th century and early 21st century, and we've talked about this before. Computer power. Consider the cost for computer power. And today, for next to nothing, you can get a used iPhone with computing power that only the Fortune 500 companies could purchase on their mainframe not long ago. Actually, even more power, right? And the cost of computer power is dropping towards zero while the value is increasing toward infinity. And the same goes for information. You know, information used to be an incredibly expensive commodity. In fact, at one point, people used to say to me, "Mark Hamilton, you are very fortunate." And I would say, "Well, why am I so fortunate?" And they said, "Because you're in the business of information." And information, people pay a lot of money for information. Well, that may have been true then, but now information is free. So it's backfired on me, if you want to call it that. Not really, because now my information is getting to more and more people. But if you want to just talk in straight business terms, now I got the short end of the stick, because information is free. You go to ChatGPT and it gives you all the information you ever needed for free. And of course, that brings me for full circle back to the whole college and all of that, which we won't get into today. But we've talked about that in the past, and the value these days in college, I just don't see it anymore, except for maybe a couple of degrees, and perhaps in the medical world or in the engineering world. But for the most part, anyway, I'll move on. The phenomenon, this phenomenon of the values rising toward infinity and the costs dropping towards zero, such as in AI today, right? This phenomenon happened because government could not get a regulatory grip on the advancement of the super rapid growth of personal computer power as it advanced at great speeds throughout the late 20th century and now in the 21st century. It's just been moving too fast for government to figure out how to really regulate it. So without the typical government regulatory burden, the technology soared and costs radically dropped. And this is not just a special phenomenon due to the breakthrough of the silicon chip. As you know, by the way, when I look over and smile, I'm looking at all of you. So that's why now and then I'll just take a little look over here. So, my camera's in front of me, though. So as you know, to demonstrate how it's not just the phenomenon of the silicon chip. I write about, and you've read in my writings about James J. Hill, for example, the railroad tycoon who opened up the entire country to development along the northern border with his transcontinental railroad without any help from the government. 150 years ago. Or Henry Ford and his perfection of the assembly line, driving costs of fractions, making the car and transportation affordable to ordinary families over 100 years ago. And that whole assembly line just drove down costs, drove up values for decades. Thomas Edison bringing electric light to the world. Incredible advancements that drove down costs and drove up standards of living for humankind. That was all before the anti-business, regulatory darkness that came to America with Franklin D. Roosevelt. So, without saying too much more about that, we can now begin to see it's the regulatory government holding back progress everywhere, in every country, in all industries. Energy, health, medicine, science, technology, they're all held back by politicization, by political agendas spawning progress-harming regulations and legislation. As we've seen in this regulatory suppression, it doesn't just stay at a certain level. It continues to rise with each new administration. So the past 4 years, we've seen this regulatory suppression rise up more than ever before over the past 4 decades in several critical industries. At Balaji's Network State Conference in Singapore, where my son Wallace and Josh both attended a couple of months ago, well, my son talked to me about the scientists he ran into who are doing some amazing things for human longevity. They're confidential. I can't talk about them here, but they're being held back, and they're expressing this to Wallace by regulations and legislation. And they're willing to go anywhere in the world to continue their research and development. But there's nowhere they can go. They express this frustration. They said wherever they would go, they would be knocked down and held back by the ruling class. Anywhere they would go, there's no place on planet Earth that they could go without, falling into these regulations that could even turn them into criminals. So that's what the geniuses of society are constantly up against. That's why today we're still saying the same talk that we were 25 years ago about curing aging and about longevity. There is nowhere in the world they can go to pursue their life-saving research. So imagine their excitement when Wallace talked to them about this idea of a land-based immortalis. Now, thousands of such geniuses of society would have that same elated reaction. Indeed, they, along with countless others, are just unable to move forward due to all countries' anti-progress laws and regulations. There's nowhere in the world to proceed with their incredible research and development. And their creation, which I'm privy to, would add decades to our lives. Mark my words, decades. So the ruling classes of all countries suppress progress with their legislation and regulations. We're all under a ruling class. Remember, I talked about the ruling class as a cult. We're all, since early life and through school, this is what a cult does. It manipulates your minds to control your life for their benefit, for their power and wealth. These politicians enter worth $100,000 and they leave worth $200 million. $200 million. Why is that? It's because they're a cult taking advantage of its victims, the people. It's always been like that. And because it's always been like that, the people accept it. It all seems normal. All civilizations lived in this same dimension. But there is this other dimension we've been talking about. Our planet has never seen this other dimension before. So let's start and really define the next puzzle piece, what it is that holds us back. What gives the ruling class such power to hold back progress? And everyone's basically accepting it, right? They may be a little disgruntled and talk, under their breath about it, but basically everyone's accepting it, right? So it's a common denominator among all countries, among all ruling classes is a common denominator. Let's find that common denominator. So what gives the ruling class, all ruling classes, their destructive power to hold us back? Well, if you were unmuted, I know a bunch of you would be saying initiatory force, right? Initiatory force. That's the common denominator. That's the scourge. That's what's behind the cult all over the world for all time. And as you all know, initiatory force is the opposite of self-defense force. It's the initiation of force. Say, like with initiating political agendas by the use of force through regulations, through legislation, through litigation. So initiatory force has allowed the ruling class to become the scourge of mankind. Now, without initiatory force, there could no longer be an agenda-backed, politicized legislation and regulation holding the geniuses back. It couldn't happen. In fact, the ruling class itself could not exist. Because when you really get down to it, the ruling class is there because of initiatory force. We'll learn a little bit more about that today. So, how can we remove it? Or here's a better question for people who aren't readers of mine. How could we possibly remove it? And is it needed? We think initiatory force in our ruling class is needed because we've always had it. And we're made to believe by our leaders that they must have that power to rule over us. How do they make us believe that? Well, through their illusions. We've talked about this in the past. Illusion pollution. Our minds are full of illusion pollution. They're illusions. And it's all we've ever known. So people who are watching this on YouTube for the first time, pay close attention to this next puzzle piece. And my readers, I know you're right there with me. So I'm going to ask you straight up, why should one adult have the power to initiate force on any other adult or their business? They should not, including politicians and regulatory bureaucrats, right? All of us neo-thinkers know that well. So this brings us now to two further puzzle pieces to the super puzzle. First, the tool to remove initiatory force. And it's, again, if we were unmuted, you'd all yell, the prime law. It is the fundamental natural law of protection and is the constitution of Immortalis. And you all know that the prime law is a fundamental law of protection, which is the only valid purpose of government, to protect its people. The prime law gets down to the very fundamental of what protection is, and it protects the smallest of all minorities, the minority of one, the individual. And when the individual is protected, all people are equally protected. Now, the next puzzle piece is you must understand how this new dimension of civilization would work. And this is where my readers now, we're going to open up some new thought here. Now I say new dimension because the prime law removes the ruling class. You see, the ruling class can only exist through initiatory force, which includes forced tax collection. And every civilization on earth and throughout history have lived under a ruling class, under leaders who could exercise initiatory force against the people and their businesses, more or less at their favor. The ruling classes all have this initiatory force built into their political structure. Immortalis does not and never can with the prime law constitution. Everything is based upon mutual value exchange. So government becomes a protection service. Now I'll explain in a moment how it collects revenues without forced-back taxes. Right? That seems impossible. We'll talk about that in a moment. Now, Immortalis, your dollars do the voting, not elections. It's a whole new structure of government. In other words, you send, we'll start off at this. Well, you send a 10% tithe. That's a voluntary payment to the best values for protection. The only proper function of government, protection, right? So you'll send your 10% tithe to what you feel is the greatest value in offering the greatest value of protection. So the competitive nature of this service drives the best values to the top. Now, as I describe what living in Immortalis would be like, you'll understand why citizens would gladly, voluntarily pay a 10% tithe. In this civilization, for the first time on planet Earth, the geniuses of society are free of burdensome political regulations and legislation. They're free to bring their exhilarating values to the world without being held back. Now remember back to the beautiful puzzle piece in the relatively free from regulations computer and information revolution. Prices for computer power and information were driven down to fractions, towards zero, while the values, such as the computer power and information, raced toward infinity. With no ruling class in Immortalis, this phenomenon spreads over the entire industrial landscape, not just computer power. In this purely free civilization never seen before on Earth, the people would become universally wealthy, just as we became computer power wealthy. Costs would be driven so low that we all rise in our wealth power, our purchasing power, as prices are driven down and values are driven up. And that would happen to all industries, including the health industry, with no more ruling class political agendas, no more of those regulations and litigation holding back amazing research and development. Progress would accelerate and fatal diseases would become conquered and cured. Diseases like cancer, heart disease, and yes, aging too, would be cured in our lifetime, in our lifetimes. You know, we had a promising cure to cancer 50 years ago. It almost hurts for me to tell this little story. My father, he was very renowned scientist at DuPont with 5 patents. Not only did he develop the patents, but then he would go to the other side and move into the marketing of those products. So he was quite, a whiz kid. That's not doing justice, but at DuPont, he was highly acclaimed. So he was on a team at DuPont that had developed basically what I consider a cure for cancer. The way this worked, they developed this extremely fine textile, so fine it was almost like a liquid. And it was impregnated with cancer-killing drugs. And those extremely fine textiles would be injected into the bloodstream. They would travel through the bloodstream and they would find and wrap itself around cancer tumors that now became harmless. They're trapped in their man-made coffins, I'll call it. But here's what happened. The government enforced these cost-prohibitive regulations that killed that project. Now remember, DuPont's the largest chemical company in the world. So if it could kill such a promising cure to cancer, one of the most widespread diseases of humankind, and DuPont was on the brink of curing that. But the cost-prohibitive regulations, government regulations, killed that at DuPont, which had billions of dollars behind it. Imagine all the people like who my son met in Singapore, those scientists, what it does to them. Just everything is held back. And that's why 25 years later, we're no closer. We have not made the leap into the next level of human longevity. I was on a phone with a very prominent longevity expert, and he was expressing his frustrations to me. He's been in this all his life. He's about my age, and nothing's changed. We are still at the same level of longevity as we were 50 years ago. So these cost-prohibitive, politicized regulations could not exist in Immortalis. So Immortalis would quickly become the medical mecca of the world, rapidly curing these complex diseases. Why? Well, those scientists Wally talked to, or my son Wallace talked to, would come rushing to Immortalis. And so would a lot of these big, just honest, not big business, not revolving door with government, but just these honest geniuses of society. It'd be a brain drain across the world. They'd all come to Immortalis to conquer and cure. Moreover, we've talked about crime would go away. The biggest motivator for crime is gone, money. Everyone's going to be wealthy in that society, so that reduces most crime. And the prime law, the whole focus of it is not allowing initiatory force. So punishment would be very swift and unforgiving. Crime would just evaporate and become just a theory. Now, as all people in this new civilization, which is a new dimension on earth, by the way, as they become wealthier and wealthier, healthier and healthier, safer and safer, well, first they will be more than happy to voluntarily pay 10% of their income to the system that made them wealthy, healthy, and safe, to the protection services we'll call government, that provide the conditions that bring the people so much wealth, health, safety, and frankly, happiness. So that's how the financing of the so-called government would occur. Because people would be they'd look around the world and say, no, thank you. I'll be right here and I'll pay my 10% tithe. So they want to keep this place, Immortalis. They want to keep it the way it is because it brought them and their loved ones such a great life. So for the first time, government would exist without forced taxes, without initiatory force, without forced taxes with a voluntary tithe. Now, let's explore what's happening with everyone becoming more and more wealthy and technology driving down costs of fractions towards zero. So let's look forward a little bit, and this is something new to all of us. Let's look forward into Immortalis. Right now, we've just been concentrating on launching Immortalis. Let's do a little neo-thinking out there into the future as to where we're headed. So at some point, the people, including and especially business owners, would become so wealthy in this society where your purchasing power just moves toward infinity, right? That with such explosive purchasing power, that greater and greater profits, well, that becomes less and less important because everything is so affordable and people are so wealthy. I mean, they can afford everything they need and more. So what do business owners, what do I do? What do we do to seek motivation now? What motivates us now? Because in capitalism, all we've ever been taught is that profits motivate business owners. Profits. But in Immortalis, looking into the future, with these puzzle pieces we've been bringing together here, well, profits no longer are so important to us. In fact, they become less and less relative. So people like me, business owners, Elon Musk, entrepreneurs, well, they would become more and more motivated. And I could tell you this straight from my heart, by their ability to create values that help others. Deeply motivated by their internal feelings of contributing important values to society and how that resonates emotionally within, the pride, the admiration, the happiness inside. Business owners would shift from being motivated by profits. Remember, they have more money than they could ever spend in that future society, in that new dimension. So they would shift their motivation from profits to being motivated to helping others. And indeed, as shocking as this may seem, despite everything that's been said about capitalism, well, that is the end result of pure capitalism. We've never had pure capitalism. And it's what I call the beautiful ecosystem of mankind, achieving happiness within by creating values for others. It's so beautiful. Let's just sit back. Hi, everyone. Let's just take a minute to think about that. The beautiful ecosystem of being human, fulfilling that child of the past, that happiness within, by bringing values to others. It's poetic.